a swarm of unstoppable, ravenous ants, viciously tearing apart the prey they capture. What happens if a human gets in the ants' way? Will they too be consumed? What in the supercontinent of Gondwana is going on in here?
Oh, I'm having an indoor picnic because I don't want ants to steal my lunch.
You know ants are also often found inside houses?
Well, it's a little more than that. I'm kind of afraid that after I eat my lunch, I'm going to have a sugar crash and fall asleep, and while I'm sleeping, the ants are going to come and eat me.
You can't be serious.
I've seen enough videos on the internet of that guy, Ants Canada, feeding dead animals to ants to be a little concerned. And have you seen the Indiana Jones movie with the aliens?
First, it takes many days for ants to scavenge even a small carcass. And second, are you seriously going to use Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull as an example? I mean, the movie's not as bad as people like to say it is. However, it is anything but scientifically accurate.
Those ants ate a guy in seconds. I am not going to take that chance.
I think they're supposed to be army ants. While we do have species this far north, they're all subterranean and not above-ground predators like those in the tropics.
Well, I would never go to the rainforest. The insects will just eat you right down to the bone, like piranhas, but on land, so you can't just avoid them by not swimming.
Okay, this is ridiculous. I'm going to go to the Amazon and I'm going to prove to you that there is nothing to fear from army ants.
The Amazon? That is like the worst place to go in the world. It'll break your spirits. It'll chew you up and spit you back out again. You won't last a week.
I think you're confusing the Amazon rainforest with an Amazon fulfillment center.
No, I mean the Amazon rainforest. There's huge snakes, big cats, all those fish that guy caught on Animal Planet. Then there's all the insects. Wasps, bees, giant spiders, flesh-eating ants. Some termites will probably eat your underwear.
I am going to show you that the Amazon rainforest is nowhere near as dangerous as you think it is. See you in a month or two.
Never gonna see them again. Where's my burrito?
As a child, I remember hearing stories about great legions of flesh-eating ants in the Amazon rainforest. These tales depicted an insect capable of skeletonizing a large vertebrate rapidly. Where do these stories come from, and does such a terrifying creature exist? As far as I can tell, the image of swarms of deadly South American ants were introduced to Western audiences by H.G. Wells' 1905 short story, Empire of the Ants, where large ants attack villages in the remote jungles of Brazil. They show incredible intelligence, watching human behavior with large eyes, make use of fire and metal tools, along with having a deadly toxin, with a few stings being enough to kill a human, which of course they reduce to a gleaming white skeleton in tattered rags. The story seems to mainly be written to explore the question if humanity truly has dominion over the earth, especially European colonial capitalists, with the end of the story suggesting the ants will come to claim the earth from humanity. So far their action has been a steady progressive settlement, involving the flight or slaughter of every human being in the new areas they invade. By 1920 they will be halfway down the Amazon. I fixed 1950 or 60 at the latest for the discovery of Europe. These ants are described in the story as something new, but a few decades later, the army ant would be cemented as Earth's most fearsome insect in 1938's Leiningen vs. the Ants by Carl Stephenson. This story in many ways is the opposite of Empire of the Ants, reversing the almost progressive anti-colonization themes, being instead a rather pro-colonial and misogynistic text. In the story, a white plantation owner in remote South America uses his special European brain juices to prepare for the eventuality of an army ant swarm, which is seen as an elemental act of God by everyone else who evacuates the area, leaving only Leiningen and his workers. When the ants arrive, the swarm is described as 2 miles wide and 10 miles long, and every animal from small mammals to tapirs and jaguars flee before the horde, which also defoliates the forest as they sweep through. In the story, it is said the ants can eat a human to the bones before you can spit 3 times. And in the course of fighting back the ants, Leiningen watches them capture a deer, and upon subduing the large mammal, take a total of 6 minutes to completely consume. The ants nearly defeat Leiningen, using leaves as rafts to cross his moats of water and oil, and so numerous they simply overwhelm the plantation's defenses. Ultimately, Leiningen has to make a desperate run through the ant swarm in order to flood the entire plantation by opening up a dam, which washes away all the ants, while his workers fend them away from the plantation house located on a rise with burning oil. This story would go on to be influential and be adapted into the 1954 film The Naked Jungle, which follows basically the same plot, just with a toxic romance added in before the ants show up. The film also calls the ants the marabunta, another name for army ants in South America. It is from these short stories that it seems most modern media showing killer army ants is derived. You have the 2007 made-for-TV movie Destination Infestation, or I guess sometimes called Swarm, or also sometimes listed as Ants on a Plane, which I guess if you want people to watch your crappy horror movie, why not give the film 3 separate titles? While this film invokes Paraponera clavata, the bullet ant, the film shares many similarities with the aforementioned stories, with a swarm of smarter, larger, more toxic ants attacking people on an airline flight after hitching a ride inside the body of one of the passengers because they are also apparently part xenomorph. Like in the Empire of the Ants, these ants have a highly toxic sting that can quickly kill a human, which I will be discussing at much greater length in the next video in this series on how dangerous the bullet ant really is. Okay, there is no avoiding the single most prominent example of army ants in a movie, which I all know you have been patiently waiting for me to talk about. 2008's Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Here, Indy and his friends face off with KGB operatives in the middle of an army ant swarm deep in a computer-generated South American jungle. These Siafu ants can completely cover and subdue a human in, well, less time than it takes to spit 3 times. Sure, they don't skeletonize the guy right away, but they wrangle a struggling human and carry him away within seconds. Flesh-eating army ant swarms seem like the scariest animals on the planet going by these short stories and movies. But how much does this media reflect actual army ants? Is this ravenous reputation seen in fiction deserved? The term army ant is not a taxonomic group, but defined by a set of 3 behaviors and traits, known as army ant syndrome. These are, they hunt cooperatively and never alone, they are nomadic and do not have permanent nests, and have large ergotoid queens, which means they never develop wings like other ant species. While not taxonomically defined, the syndrome is largely restricted to a few ant lineages, most of which also contain ant species that do not exhibit army ant syndrome. Army ant syndrome does present several challenges to the ants. However, the 3 traits of army ant syndrome are complementary, working to reinforce each other. Because army ants need to hunt as a collective, they cannot send a queen off to start a colony from scratch like most other ants. Hence, they have become ergotoids. Instead, when a colony reaches a certain threshold size, it splits up in a process called fission, dividing up the existing colony between at least 2 queens. The queens must maintain a large worker force to keep the colony alive, and never needing to get airborne, they become larger and lay vast amounts of eggs. This drives the ants to be nomadic, as all these growing larvae require more fresh meat than they could reasonably forage in one area. When rearing larvae, most army ants enter what is known as the nomadic phase, where they are constantly on the move, resting in different locations each night. The ants, though, need to protect their queen and larvae from harm, and so form bivouacs, temporary nests usually made from the living bodies of the colony. Once larvae pupate, there is less of a demand for food, and the ants can stay in one place for a while in a stationary phase where the queen can lay a new batch of eggs and the previous group mature into adults to help feed them when they hatch, which will send the colony back to a nomadic lifestyle. Among army ants, most are subterranean predators remaining hidden below the landscape, often specialized to attack other ant colonies. However, a few species have a more generalist diet and hunt on the forest floor. Pretty much any of these surface-foraging army ants that are the most applicable to this video are in the subfamily Dorylini. While it is not completely settled, it is thought this subfamily arose from a single species of ant with army ant syndrome living about 100 million years ago, right as the great southern supercontinent of Gondwana broke apart during the Cretaceous. And ever since, swarms of predatory ants have roamed these continents, and even spread up into North America and through tropical Asia. While there are several impressive surface-rating species, such as the tiny Labidus praedator, which looks like a dark ooze from a distance, the classic army ant is Eciton burchellii from the Neotropics. While highly carnivorous like those in the empire of the ants, Eciton is nearly blind with tiny eyes, hunting by pheromone and vibration. Similarly, they can have massive mobile colonies like what is depicted in Leiningen versus the ants. However, are a bit smaller, maybe only 200,000 ants in a swarm stretching 100 meters in length. Very impressive, but not even close to 10 miles. They are also completely carnivorous and would have no interest in foliage. Unlike Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls ants, these ants never take up residence in the ground, only utilizing above-ground bivouacs, and the ants themselves look quite a bit different. However, the film does show the ants building a scaffold from the bodies of many living ants to try and reach prey, which is one of the neatest abilities of army ants, particularly Eciton, which create ramps, bridges, and as I mentioned earlier, an entire nest out of their own bodies. How these structures form is still under study by scientists, as ants do not have a hive mind, just individual ants making decisions. Based on experiments, it seems that with no or very little communication between ants, they can quickly form structures like scaffolds or bridges, in which each individual ant can self-organize to construct what is needed to make traffic flow of the colony's movements more efficient. Eciton ants are rather recognizable, especially the very distinctive and formidable soldiers, which possess sickle-like mandibles. These soldiers have evolved for one purpose: to take on vertebrates, but not to kill and butcher them for food like depicted in killer ant stories. The long curved mandibles can do little else than effectively staple the ant to the skin of a vertebrate, making them very difficult to remove and give them the ideal position to repeatedly sting the intruder. However, even beyond these specialized mandibles, it has been stated that army ant mandibles in general have a tough time consuming vertebrates.
I have read Eciton will sometimes inadvertently catch a vertebrate and mercilessly sting the unfortunate creature, injecting a fatal dose of the ant venom, then just leave the carcass to be scavenged by flies, which has been observed and documented several times.
But this has always felt sort of odd to me. Other more omnivorous ants can skeletonize a small vertebrate, as seen on the Ants Canada YouTube channel, or this unfortunate Amazonian amphibian. Well, it turns out this is a slight misconception. Eciton workers have been shown to be able to consume small vertebrates. Based on chance observations of one scientist, army ants were able to completely consume a house gecko over a period of an hour, and a small snake over about 3. What was noticed is that the flesh of the reptiles became more viscous over time, making it easier for the ants to feed, possibly by action of the venom. Well, I guess I should go find some Eciton and show that they're pretty harmless to humans. Except I feel like I'm forgetting to mention something. Right, army ants are not only found in Central and South America, that's just where killer ant stories seem to always take place. Across the Atlantic is a similarly spectacular surface-foraging ant, the driver ants of the genus Dorylus, which look an awful lot like the ants in Indiana Jones. In fact, the name Siafu that these ants are referred to as is a Swahili word often applied to Dorylus, and like the crystal skull ants will excavate nests to use as temporary bivouacs. Among the species in the genus there are both carnivores and omnivores, so you would have to potentially worry about crops if some came through. They also, and very importantly, have more scissor-like mandibles, and so can more easily butcher vertebrate flesh. However, most large animals easily escape or avoid them. From what I have found, there are some observations of them killing livestock confined in cages, or other animals that likewise have trouble moving. However, the main source for this is from the 1840s, so it might be an over-exaggeration and only be a rare event. So I guess Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull got the right kind of army ant, but just put them on the wrong continent. Maybe if this video gets like 1 million views or something like that, I'll have to go to Africa and see if Dorylus can skeletonize a cow carcass or something. But for now, let's see how army ants react to human prey. Now, in order to test the aggression of Eciton army ants, we need to find some, which fortunately can be quite simple, especially when they come and find you. This swarm happened to arrive right at the research station I was staying at and form a bivouac under a log out in the open, which was very exciting.
So I'm super excited because I've never found one of these before. This is a bivouac. So this is a swarm of army ants, and during the night they create a big ball out of the bodies of the different members of the colony, and they use that as a temporary nest as they sort of move through the environment. So you can just see ants sort of shoved together underneath this log, and they're sort of coming in and out. And somewhere in this mass is the queen. In all these ants, which you would not want to mess with this because there's, a lot of ants in here. And then there's just lines going all over, in and out. But I'm so excited to see one of these. It's just tucked right in there. And this is super cool. Yeah, I've never found one of these. Awesome.
In my experience, army ants feel very aggressive, almost immediately going into attack mode if you barely disturb them. When I was filming some macro footage in Costa Rica, I barely brushed a plant and had several get over to my hand in that time and start stinging. Of course, this is not truly aggression, but a defense. Because these ants carry everything they value with them, any space the army ants are occupying is their territory, and they will defend that if you enter the space. Fortunately, they do not have a particularly painful sting. It does hurt, like being pricked by a needle, so it does the job of telling me to get away. As you can see, if I put my hand in their midst, they immediately swarm and start stinging. By the way, don't do this. It is not a pleasant experience. But what about those soldiers? Are they worse? Can they draw blood? Is it true they cannot cut vertebrate skin? Well, first I need to find one.
No, here's one. Right there. See, it's biting onto my nail. It's not even sure what I am. It's like completely lost interest in me very quickly. It doesn't even realize I'm a mammal. Which is actually quite surprising because I thought, because army ants can be so defensive that they would actually keep on biting.
The soldier just walked over my skin in no rush. I had to induce a bite by applying pressure and have the ant latch on.
Oh, there we go.
Don't see any blood.
So yeah, basically it just latches on and digs in its mandibles and stings. Actually, that kind of hurts. Yeah, this guy's been on here quite a while and I don't see any blood. So if he can't get through there, I don't think any army ant can. Okay, I'm gonna get him off.
Guess I should remove the ant.
Go.
But the strength of the ant's muscles and the curved shape of the mandibles makes the ant nearly impossible to remove, like pulling a fish hook caught in the skin out. Actually, exactly like that. After getting the ant off successfully and the soldier walking off, I can get a close-up look at the damage. The mandibles did not go deep enough to draw blood, and the ant was latched on there for some time. I have heard rumors of indigenous people using Eciton or Dorylus to close lacerations like stitches or staples. And honestly, I could see that working, if you made sure not to move the injured area too much, as army ants can successfully be dislodged with quite minor effort. But now, the final test. All these killer ant stories show it is impossible to walk amongst them. You will get swarmed and stung. And even if they can't eat you in the time it takes to spit 3 times, can they still swarm you in seconds like they did with my hand? Well, no.
That is a raiding swarm.
Compared directly with Crystal Skull and the lack of army ant aggression or swarming up my boots is almost comical. I have found you can be among them, literally standing in the middle of the swarm and not even get stung. In Costa Rica, sometimes a swarm would be crossing a trail, like a 2-meter wide section of trail covered in ants, and like I had places to be, work to do, and I just walked over them. Same here in the Amazon. This whole dirt road is covered in Eciton, and not a single sting. Most ant stings are easily avoided by simply wearing proper footwear and pants. Even in this case where I was searching for a special bird only found in the very center of army ant swarms, like maybe 3 scaled my boots and stung my ankles. I really think unless you lose the high ground and get Anakin Skywalkered and roll into a swarm of army ants at the bottom of a ravine, you really don't have anything to fear, which is great because they are remarkable animals. Perhaps the most amazing thing about army ants is their status as a keystone species and the amount of biodiversity directly associated with them. As I said, I faced this horde of army ants to catch a glimpse of a bird. This bird, an ocellated antbird which can only be found near army ant swarms, because for a bird this is a great place to find food. As army ants snake their way through the undergrowth, animals take notice of them and run, like described in Leiningen versus the Ants, with all the animals of the rainforest running away from what approaches. In reality, most of what flees is insects. Ahead of the ants, cockroaches make a mad dash to hopefully evade the thousands of mandibles coming their way. Insects fleeing from the ants are exposing themselves from usually safe hiding spots, giving many predators a convenient place to hunt for prey. Antbirds, named for their association with ants, can often be seen bouncing between perches above the ant swarms. There is a distinctive hierarchy among species, with larger, more aggressive species like the ocellated antbird taking the best spots, with medium-sized species like the bicolored antbird taking positions further out while displacing some smaller species to the very edge of the swarm. Some of these bird species, like the ocellated antbirds, are obligate ant followers, which means they can exclusively be found near ant swarms. Other species are more opportunistic, like the sooty antbird of South America. Other birds, like sparrows, toucanets, woodcreepers, and some other weird ant-associated species like ant thrushes, often also can be located near ant swarms. These birds are kleptoparasites, which means they steal food the ants may otherwise have captured, but they also add more biodiversity to ant swarms. The flock of foraging birds leaves behind a splattering of bird poop, which apparently has enough nutrition to support special butterflies that only feed on the feces of antbirds. Birds are not the only hunters hoping to catch prey flushed by the ants. Wasps and flies perch on foliage around the ants, or in the case of this stylogaster fly, hover over the front of the foraging swarm, their compound eyes searching for movement. These are parasitoids, laying eggs on fleeing insects, which, if they escape the clutches of the ants, will be consumed by the maggots of the flies and wasps. In this particular sequence, a cockroach is trying to flee while being harassed by tachinid flies, only for the ants to capture and subdue the unfortunate insect. This is one of my favorite sequences I have ever filmed. Like, it is quite disturbing, but you can feel the desperation of the prey to avoid the onslaught of predators. Which fate is worse, ripped apart by ants or escaped to be consumed by maggots? Tell me down in the comments section. Beyond species that hunt what the ants flush, some animals live among the ants. These include beetles that feed on scraps or prey on injured ants, along with inequilines, animals that just live in the colony, generally unnoticed by the ants. In all, more than 500 different species have been found to be associated with Eciton burchellii alone, and 300 have probably evolved a dependence on these ants. While savage predators, they are not the horde of total destruction as depicted in fiction. And ultimately, army ants convert that which they kill into more life, supplying a plenitude of niches and opportunities for life in the rainforests they roam. My friend, I am surrounded by the remarkable life of the Amazon rainforest, a land draped in vibrant greens. I hope that I have shown you that the army ant you have learned to fear from adventure media does not truly exist, an exaggeration of fascinating insects that pose little threat to human life and truly enrich the most biodiverse place on Earth with hundreds of associated species. However, the critical importance of this keystone species in places like the Amazon means that if the ants decline, their connection with so many other life forms could lead to the extinction of over 300 species. Army ants require a lot of food, and so changes in microclimates and loss of habitat due to habitat fragmentation are thought to be devastating to these ants, and fragmentation especially has been shown to greatly reduce the diversity in populations of associate bird species. These ants tend to avoid open, sunny habitats, so would likely be one of the many species heavily impacted if the Amazon rainforest morphs into a savanna-like habitat, as predicted to occur if deforestation continues. It is imperative that we move on from these fears founded in adventure literature and see these ants as remarkable species that we should protect. At this time, the Amazon rainforest is under unprecedented threat, primarily from cattle ranching, soy production for livestock, and other practices such as gold mining. We must be conscientious consumers, reducing the ravenous consumption of meat we find so horrifying when it is the ants doing the consuming. This is as much the ants, the antbirds, the parasitoids, and the poop butterflies world as ours. I urge you to look into the threats that the Amazon rainforest is under and discover ways to help protect this vast emerald jewel on this blue marble hurtling through the stars. It is time to take on the bullet ant. Are they dangerous? Are they aggressive? Today, I will be picking one up to find out.